Hello everyone, welcome back to Bajirao IAS Academy, UPSC Mains 2024 paper analysis. So in this particular session, we have some more questions which were asked in Mains 2024 examination. So with this session, we will try to complete Gender Studies paper 3 analysis. So the first question that we are going to start this session is with the disaster resilience. So as I have already told you that in Gender Studies paper 3, disaster management is one of the section, and in fact every year at least 3 to 4 questions are being asked in this paper from disaster management section. So within disaster management, apart from studying about different disasters, you need to prepare well about disaster resilience, adaptation and mitigation aspects as well. So the question is, what is disaster resilience and how it is determined? Describe various elements of a resilience framework. Also mention the global targets of Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. Right? So in fact there is a global framework which is Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction at the global level, and in fact like how we have sustainable development goals which were adopted in 2015 and the world aiming to achieve all the sustainable development goals by the year 2030. So Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction would also be achieved. The goals, the objectives of this particular framework would also be gets achieved by 2030. Now what should be the approach of the question? So it is very simple. First you need to mention what is disaster resilient and how it is determined, and then you need to describe various elements of the resilience framework and also mention the global targets of Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. So there are no complex directive words attached to this question, so because of that reason it is very simple. Now initially we will try to understand what is disaster resilience. So disaster resilient means, now whenever any disaster struck any region, so that could leave a huge trail of destruction in that particular area, and we all knew that. So take for example India's coastal region. So coastal region, both the eastern coast of India and western coast of India, so highly vulnerable to frequent cyclones, and any cyclone which results in large-scale destruction is known as a disaster. So what needs to be done in order to minimize the loss and damage and the destructive nature of such disasters, right? So we need to develop resilience of India's coastal regions. Both eastern coast and the western coast needs to be more and more resilient to cyclones, so that they could withstand the worst impact or destructive nature of these cyclones. So disaster resilience is all about anticipation of disasters, right? We need to zone the regions that are based on their vulnerability and planning and reducing the disaster risk effectively, to focus on or with the objective of protecting persons, communities, countries, their livelihoods, health, the cultural heritage, socio-economic assets and ecosystems. And this is the objective, or this is what is known as disaster resilience. Now when we talk about the regions which are prone to earthquakes, now in earthquake prone regions, construction needs to be regulated to make a region resilient to the earthquakes. And in a similar way, in cyclone prone regions or cyclone vulnerable regions, infrastructure needs to be completely revamped, so that those regions would be more and more resilient, even if there are disasters in future, even if there are any such adverse weather based impacts in future. So those regions can actually withstand such a destructive force. And in fact The disaster resilience of any region can be determined through the potential hazards of those disasters and also the vulnerabilities because of these disasters. And in fact, disaster resilience can also be determined by the preparation or preparedness measures, because preparedness is also an integral part or an inclusive part of the disaster management. Now when we talk about the preparedness, so it is very easy. For example, we could predict the cyclones, and we could disseminate information through early warning. So if we have a robust early warning systems and emergency response plans and adaptive capacity, the ability to change or withstand new risks as well. So these are all part of the disaster resilience, and this is how disaster resilience of an area can be effectively determined. So however, we need to understand different elements which are part of the disaster resilience framework. So when we look into the different elements which are part of it, so these elements are designate and develop dedicated disaster response corridors. So dedicated disaster response corridors in the sense that, for example, based on the vulnerability of India's land mass to various disasters, for example cyclones, tsunamis, floods, droughts, landslides. So what we can do, we can actually do the zonation. Okay, so zonation of the regions to understand the vulnerability of those particular regions. So we can develop the dedicated disaster corridors, and these corridors will help in quick dissemination of information and supply of relief and rescue material to the vulnerable regions, and also evacuation of people in case if we have the early warning systems already in place, and those early warning systems predicts the possible disaster in future. So all these things will substantially help in reducing loss of life as well as reducing damage to property. So these things will help in reducing damage to property and also reducing loss of lives as well. And it is very important because whenever any region gets impacted by any disaster, emergency services needs to be provided at a quicker pace. So when emergency services are provided at a quicker pace, that would substantially reduces loss of life and damage to the property as well. And if we develop disaster resilience, so this is also one way which could substantially reduces damage to the property as well, right? So because understand that, imagine the government has built a lot of infrastructure. Government built a lot of infrastructure in the coastal city of Mumbai, but due to climate change, generally what has been happening within the Arabian Sea, the cyclone frequency and intensity has been increasing substantially. So when government has been building a lot of infrastructure in Mumbai, and due to increasing intensity and frequency of cyclones very often, so even though the government has been building infrastructure, but at regular intervals the infrastructure is being damaged because of the cyclones, right? A substantial amount of taxpayers' money is invested in the infrastructure, but infrastructure is regularly damaged by these cyclones. So therefore we will not be able to achieve the level of development that we wanted, right? Because the government regularly investing, but this infrastructure is being damaged by the cyclones. However, what we need to do, we need to build the resilient infrastructure. We need to focus on building resilient infrastructure. Now resilient infrastructure in the sense that we have developed infrastructure and there are number of cyclones, but the infrastructure that we have built, that we have constructed, is able to withstand the cyclone impact. So that is known as the resilience. So this is not just applicable to cyclones but many other disasters. So therefore, in order to do that, the zonation is very, very important, and zonation will help us develop the disaster response corridors as well. And in fact, agriculture is another very important area that we need to develop resilience, right? So what are the benefits or the advantages of agriculture if we look into this perspective very briefly? So without any doubt, agriculture provides us with food security, and agriculture is also the source of livelihood for around more than 50% of India's population, right? So in fact, a number of people who are living below poverty line are also from the agriculture sector, and agriculture also has a huge economic importance in India as the primary sector. So but recent times, generally what has been happening, agriculture is one of the worst hit area because of the climate change and global warming and changing weather patterns and phenomena. So in order to protect, conserve agriculture from the changing weather patterns, so what we need to do, we need to plan, we need to shift our focus to make agriculture more and more resilient to climate change, or we could say that it should be resilient to the disasters as well. For example, if there are floods, if there are drought like conditions, so generally the impact would be on the agriculture itself, right? So that would impact all these different areas. Economic importance in the sense that, so it could increases the food inflation, right? So it could also increases the supply side inflation as well, which is known as cost push inflation, right? So in order to do that, what we need to do, we need to introduce drought resistant crops, we need to focus on precision farming and also the soil conservation techniques as well. And in fact, there are we need to integrate ecosystems, particularly we need to integrate ecosystems, and we need to introduce disaster risk reduction strategies by conserving, restoring and substantially managing the natural ecosystems like forests, wetlands and even the coastal habitats as well, because that plays a very important role. And remember that climate change and global warming also have the worst impact on ecosystem, right? So degradation of the biodiversity, extinction of the species. So therefore, we need to make the ecosystems resilient to the worst impact of the climate change, and that is also very important here. And last but not least, we should also adequately focus on the early warning systems. For example, when it comes to floods, cyclones, tsunamis, even landslides, for all these major disasters, we need to develop a robust early warning systems. So these early warning systems would regularly alert us about the potential disasters that could hit different regions. So therefore, these early warning systems can detect these disasters, and they can also provide timely alerts for the different disasters such as cyclones, floods, heat waves and even landslides also. So we need to develop the early warning systems using technologies such as remote sensing, artificial intelligence and also big data analytics. So when we predict these disasters, that would also help us significantly reduce loss of life and also damage to the property as well, right? So there are certain targets. There are some targets as part of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction 2015 to 2013, right? So I have linked it with the sustainable development goals that the UN has adopted in the year 2015 with the objective of achieving the sustainable development goals by 2030. And now if you look at the targets of Sendai framework convention for disaster risk reduction, so sorry, it is just a framework. Now, the first target is to substantially reduce global mortality by 2030. Now, we all knew that because of various disasters across the world, there has been increased mortality or increased loss of life. The first objective or the first target is to reduce the global disaster mortality by 2030. So, aiming to lower average per 1 lakh global mortality between 2020 30 compared to 2005 and 2015 levels. So this is the first target, which is reduce global mortality. And secondly, apart from loss of life, damage to property is another significant concern at the global level due to these disasters. So the second objective is reducing the direct disaster economic loss in relation to global GDP by 2030, right? So as of now, around $40 billion of losses are being caused by disasters across the world. So therefore, as a percentage of the global GDP, we must reduce damage to the property, and we should also reduce economic losses caused. And third, substantially reduce disaster damage to critical infrastructure. Okay, so as a country, we have a critical infrastructure, for example, railways, a critical infrastructure, and telecommunication, a critical infrastructure, and connectivity is also a critical infrastructure. So therefore, disasters also cause damage to the critical infrastructure. At the global level, all the countries should come together with the objective of substantially reducing the critical damage caused to the infrastructure, and also disruption of basic services among healthcare, educational facilities through developing their resilience by 2030. Remember that all these objectives have to be achieved by 2030. Now already we have been experiencing learning, there are certain shortcomings within the learning due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Now what has happened? So COVID-19 pandemic has led to the condition that, or the situation that, the physical classrooms were not conducted, and there was also a digital divide which has been existing. So with the digital divide, what generally happening is that even if there are plans to provide classes online, not all students are able to access the classes which are provided online. So therefore, disasters also cause disruptions within health and education facilities which are considered as basic services. So therefore, we should also reduce disruption of these basic services by developing resilience by the year 2030 as well. And another important target as part of Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction is substantially enhancing international framework or international cooperation between the developing countries and developed countries through adequate and sustainable support to complement their national actions for implementation of this framework by 2030. Now, without international collaboration, it is not possible for one single country. International collaboration and cooperation, it is not actually possible for one single country to achieve large scale disaster resilience or substantially reducing the worst impact of these disasters. So therefore, international collaboration is also very, very important. Now, as of now, the world is divided into the global south and global north, and there are also a lot of differences between the global south and the global north. And global north is comparatively a well-off region, so where people have a better living standards. The GDP per capita incomes of people in the global north are comparatively better than the global south. So therefore, in this context, it is very, very important that the countries in the global north should support the global south countries through technology transfer and transfer of finances. That is very important, right? So international cooperation is a very important area. as part of Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, and substantially increased number of countries with national and local disaster risk reduction strategies by 2020. So we have a National Disaster Management Authority, National Disaster Management Authority, so which was formed as part of National Disaster Management Act of 2005. So National Disaster Management Act 2005 has provided for National Disaster Management Authority at the national level and State Disaster Management Authority at the state level, and also District Disaster Management Authorities at the district level. So this is headed by the district magistrate or district collector, and the State Disaster Management Authority will be headed by Chief Minister, and it will be headed by the Prime Minister. So Sendai framework on disaster risk reduction has been emphasizing on substantially increasing the number of countries which are having the national and local level disaster risk reduction strategies, and the Sendai framework also emphasizing on substantially increasing the availability and access of multi-hazard early warning systems as well as disaster risk information as well. So ultimately, in the conclusion, you need to write disaster resilience is crucial for sustainable development, and it also requires integrated efforts and global collaboration across different sectors and scales to build safer, adaptable communities across the world. And that's how you can write a brief conclusion in the answer. But anyway, disaster resilience in India is a very important aspect, because India is vulnerable to number of disasters, right? So number of disasters, but on the other hand we have a limited economic capabilities to build resilience. But our long-term goal, a long-term strategy which is aligned with the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction and sustainable development goals aimed at achieving disaster resilience, right? So in fact, India has also launched a number of such initiatives at the global level to work with the countries in the global south and the global north. One initiative was Coalition for Disaster Risk Reduction, and India has also launched an initiative called IRIS, right? So these initiatives aimed at developing or building so IRIS means infrastructure resilience for small island states, and Coalition for Disaster Risk Resilience or disaster risk reduction. So these are the initiatives that India has launched at the global level to achieve disaster resilience. So the next our question is about the urban flooding, the problem of urban flooding. So remember that in recent times urban flooding became one of the hot topic, and UPSC almost every year asking questions about this urban flooding. Okay, so therefore this topic is very important. So if possible, you need to read about this urban floods in a very detailed manner, because every year almost all cities in India have been facing the problem of floods, especially Bengaluru, Hyderabad, Chennai, and Delhi also. So all these cities have been facing worst floods, and because of that reason UPSC regularly almost every year has been asking this question. The question is, flooding in urban areas is an emerging climate induced disaster, right? So this first statement indicating that floods in India are primarily caused by the the climate change caused by the global warming. Now in this context, you need to discuss what are the causes of the urban floods in India, and then mention features of two such major floods which took place in last 2 decades in India. And then you need to describe the policies and frameworks that the government of India has been launched, and these policies and frameworks aimed at tackling these floods, right? So this is the question, and this is in fact a lengthy question, and it requires a comprehensive answer. to score very good marks. Now, whenever you write such an answer, it is very important that you need to mention or you need to draw such a flow diagram. So when you draw a flow diagram, it sends a message to the examiner that you have understood the core demand of the question and you also have a decent amount of knowledge. So it helps you create a very good impression in the mind of examiner, and that also helps you score a very good marks. And you can see here urban flood causes. So urban floods are caused by two different factors. So first factor is a direct factor and secondly indirect factors. Now when we talk about the direct factors, so there are certain direct factors which causes urban floods. First, global climate change causing urban floods, and urbanization, particularly unplanned, unhealthy urbanization. That is a phenomenon that we observe in India's urban areas, is also one of the direct factor for the urban floods or frequent urban floods. Now when we talk about the direct factors, change in weather pattern is one of the reason. Global climate change has been leading to the change in weather pattern, and it has also been leading to the heavy rainfall as well. Now when we talk about the urbanization, there are certain direct factors. So the direct factors including developments which encroach floodplains and also causing loss of natural storage, right? So because in urban areas we generally observe the unplanned urbanization, and urban local bodies also have a poor capacity in terms of looking after the infrastructure which could be disaster resilient or flood resilient, I could say. So the unplanned urbanization and development which are very common in these urban areas encroach floodplains, and they also cause loss of natural storage as well. And in fact, there's also a continued development and redevelopment of higher density land uses in these urban areas, and increased impervious areas such as roads, roofs, paving due to increasing development densities means more runoff as well. So in fact, urban areas are well described as concrete jungles. So where these concrete jungles would not give enough space for the percolation of water or for the seepage of water, and thereby whenever there is a heavy spell of rainfall, so very often the drains in these urban areas are clogged. So we all knew about that. So drains are clogged because of poor management of the drainage, as well as the plastic pollution which clog these drains. So because of that reason, and there is no chance for the water to percolate, and there are no urban sponges. So what are these urban sponges? So urban sponges are lakes, wetlands and ponds which are present in those urban areas, which could actually absorb excess water, right? So urban sponges are being there are no such urban sponges because of the heavy encroachment. So all these factors have been making the urban areas more and more vulnerable to the floods. However, there are certain indirect factors as well. So improper and inadequate drainage system which has been existing in these urban areas. So on-road vehicle parking, attitude of the people, and improper or no waste management. So all these are the reasons for the poor urban floods, urban flood situation. Now we need to look into the approach of this question. So when we look into the approach of this particular question, so it is very simple. First and foremost, you need to define what is climate induced disaster, and you should also write about the urban flooding incidents which have been taking place across different parts of India, and why urban flooding is an emerging climate induced disaster. Discuss causes of urban floods in India. So mention the features of two such major floods in the last 2 decades in India, and describe the policies and frameworks in India which are aiming to tackle such floods. Now initially, so you just mention about these urban floods, right? So with an example, now climate change can actually cause many types of disasters in India, right? So climate change is a factor which has been creating a lot of disasters, and one such disaster is frequent floods because of increasing intensity and frequency of the rainfall. So that includes floods, wildfires, drought like conditions, tropical cyclones, landslides, and heat waves as well. So in fact, climate change impacts all weather systems and all climate around the world, and disaster displacement which can be caused by climate change, and it is one of the biggest humanitarian challenge of 21st century as well. So climate change is a reality, and climate change has been causing a lot of disasters, including urban floods as well. So the best example, Delhi urban floods in July 2023, because the Hatin Kund barrage released 2 lakh cusecs of water into river Yamuna, which led to flooding in Delhi. And in fact, in Delhi, the problem is that Yamuna floodplains are encroached. So encroachment of Yamuna floodplain is also another major reason for the urban floods. Now, urban floods in Delhi. So urban floods is an emerging climate induced disaster because of these reasons, as we have already discussed, that climate change is causing more intense and erratic rainfall, so heavy spells of rainfall within a very shorter period of time. So that is very often leads to flash floods in these urban areas. But on the other hand, urban areas have inadequate infrastructure. Because of those reasons, urban areas failed to manage excess rainfall or heavy spells of rainfall within a very short period of time. And in fact, in India, we very often observe rapid urbanization and unplanned urbanization, which is unable to manage the floods, or which is unable to manage the heavy rainfall. Recently, we have also seen the deaths of UPSC aspirants caused by the Delhi floods. So rapid urbanization along with poor drainage infrastructure make these urban areas more and more vulnerable to the flooding. And in fact, areas which are near to coast are more vulnerable to flooding due to coastal waters overflowing into the neighboring surfaces during the rain events as well. And apart from that, there's also sudden release or failure to release water from dams, and urban heat island effect is another major reason, and encroachments on natural drains and river floodplains, and improper disposal of solid waste. So all these are the major reasons for the frequent urban floods in several cities across India, right? So in fact, so the urban heat island effect, the encroachment of natural drains and river floodplains that we see in cities like Bengaluru, where the lakes and ponds are being consumed, being encroached, and floodplains of river Yamuna in Delhi were also encroached. And there's also improper disposal of solid waste that has resulted in clogged drains. And in fact, there were no attempts at desalination of these urban drainage facilities. So that also very often leads to the reduced capacity of these drainage systems and causing urban floods very frequently. Now, apart from that, there are certain other causes of urban floods in India. So when more than 15 centimeters of rainfall on a river in a single day, a river's carrying capacity would be exceeded, and that would lead to a flood-like situation. So particularly those cities which are located on the banks of rivers, because of the lower carrying capacity of these rivers, they are being flooded. And in fact, poor urban planning is also another major cause of urban flooding in India. And inadequate infrastructure, a lack of drainage infrastructure, or poor maintenance of drainage systems can also lead to flooding. And deforestation also reduces the ability of the soil to absorb water, and there is inadequate percolation or seepage of water that can also lead to the urban flooding as well. And in fact, urban areas are very well known as concrete jungles, and they failed to absorb water and into the underground, and that is also another factor which has been leading to the frequent urban floods. Now, in the question itself, it is asked that mention features of 2 such major floods in the last 2 decades in India. So Mumbai floods, which took place in the year 2005. So the major cause of Mumbai floods in the year 2005 is because of 944 millimeters of rainfall in just 24 hours. So we could say that it is one of the heavy rainfalls ever recorded, and this heavy rainfall further compounded by poor drainage systems, and they block the waterways along with the poor urban planning and development, and these drainage system is further clogged or blocked by the poor solid waste management, particularly due to the plastic pollution. So because of Mumbai floods 2005, around 1000 deaths took place, and severe infrastructure damage was also caused, and economic losses in Mumbai city exceeded 4500 crore. And Kerala floods 2018, and during Kerala floods of 2018 there was also an unprecedented heavy and torrential rainfall during the southwest monsoon time, and deforestation, particularly in the Western Ghats, poor dam management, and also unregulated construction in the flood prone areas are the major reasons for the Kerala floods. And in fact, recent landslides compounded with the flooding also caused a lot of deaths in the state of Kerala as well. So however, Kerala floods 2018 have caused around 4,000 it caused the death of 4,000 lives, and 5.4 million people are affected, and economic losses also exceeded 30,000 crore as well. Now in this context, you can write a brief and a simple conclusion, that is, implementing mitigation and adaptation strategies, cities can better prepare for and also respond to flooding events, reduce the impact on residents and also the local economy as well. So the next question, which is about the border tensions between India and Pakistan, India and China, right? So the question is, India has a long and troubled border with China and Pakistan, fraught with contentious issues. So when we talk about the India-China border, we have unsettled border, which is a line of actual control, right? So we have line of actual control between India and China. But when it comes to India and Pakistan, we have line of control. So line of control is also unsettled border between India and Pakistan. So we have a border disputes, a troubled borders with both both China and Pakistan. Now in this context, examine the conflicting issues and security challenges along the border. Now, what are the conflicting issues and the security challenges that we have been facing along the border, and also give out the development being undertaken in these areas under the border area development program and border infrastructure management scheme. So this is also a very lengthy question, and it also requires a comprehensive answer. So we all knew that we have troubled borders with both China and Pakistan. Both China and Pakistan are neighbors, right? So therefore, in recent times, we have seen that at Doklam Plateau, there was minor skirmishes between Indian forces and Chinese People's Liberation Army. And in Galwan also there were clashes that were reported. Around 20 Indian soldiers were died in these Galwan clashes between India and China. So there is a frequent unsettled borders. There are frequent skirmishes, conflicts between India and China over the boundary. And apart from that, when we talk about India and Pakistan, so India and Pakistan have also fought around 4 wars. And Pakistan very often claims the Jammu and Kashmir, the sovereignty over Jammu and Kashmir, but Jammu and Kashmir is an integral part of India, and India has the sovereignty over the entire Jammu and Kashmir. And in fact, Pakistan has been promoting the cross-border terrorism into the Indian side to achieve its objectives. And the objectives of Pakistan is to create instability, destabilize the region by promoting the terrorism, particularly the cross-border terrorism. So what should be the approach of this question? The approach is that you need to describe the border tensions with China and issue of cross-border terrorism by Pakistan briefly in the introduction, and then examine the conflicting issues and security challenges along the border, and mention development that is undertaken in these areas under the border development program and border infrastructure program, and conclude the answer by suggesting appropriate way forward to deal with these border tensions. Now, briefly, you need to describe the border tensions between India and China and India and Pakistan as well. So, firstly, we have an unresolved border dispute with China, and we have line of actual control, and this line of actual control became contentious after India gained independence and People's Republic of China was established. And in fact, the disputed borders are further complicated by lack of administrative presence in the disputed areas, and very often these disputed regions between India and China are remote in nature. Right? So the disputes or the conflicts between India and China over the borders or unsettled borders are still a cause of concern on over improving bilateral relations between both these countries. But when we talk about India and Pakistan, cross-border terrorism is one of the major threat that India has been facing from Pakistan, because cross-border terrorism is the state-sponsored terrorism. And when we talk about the cross-border terrorism, it is a form of violence which a soil of one country is used to create terror in the bordering countries. So this is the brief definition of cross-border terrorism. And in fact, as a grey zone conflict, it is an undeclared war by Pakistan, and in fact it is considered as the highest form of strategy that is being practiced by Pakistan to lead a nation for prolonged period of by small efforts. Right, so this is what is known as the cross-border terrorism. Now, what are the conflicting issues and security challenges along the India-Pakistan and India-China border? So there are a lot of territorial disputes between India and Pakistan, particularly over Sar Creek, Sar Creek at Rann of Kutch and Siachen Glacier, and even Jammu and Kashmir. So there were conflicting claims over the sovereignty of Jammu and Kashmir. So therefore, a territorial dispute is one of the major issue between India and Pakistan, and cross-border terrorism is also another major issue between India and Pakistan, because a lot of Pakistani-based terrorist organizations, particularly Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, so they have earlier in the past planned terrorist attacks in India as well, and in fact Pakistani state has been supporting these terrorist organizations openly, right? So it is very unfortunate that the international community has not recognized India's efforts, and it is also very highly evident that Pakistan's efforts to promote terrorism are not condemned at the global level. So it is very unfortunate, and in fact Pakistan has been violating ceasefire very frequently, and ceasefire violation is also a very common feature. So despite the 2003 ceasefire agreement, there have been many instances of ceasefire violation along the line of actual control, and that is also a cause of concern. And in fact border areas are also highly prone to cross-border drug smuggling via drones as well. And in fact insurgents have sanctuaries in neighboring countries of India, particularly in countries like Myanmar as well. And in fact there's also a lot of military build-up, so that has been taking place along the line of actual control in recent times, particularly as part of the Galwan clashes. So India's or China's increased military presence along the line of actual control also poses serious security threats as well. And in fact there are also frequent standoff between the military of China and India as well, because previously we have observed 2018 Doklam clashes and 2020 the Galwan Valley clashes as well. So the development being undertaken in these areas under the border development program and border infrastructure program. So what are the developments which are being undertaken in these areas? So border area development program, BADP, border area development program. So when we talk about the border area development program, so this particular program aims to develop infrastructure and improve security in the border area. So that is the objective of the border area development program. So it in fact covers around 117 border districts in 16 states and 2 union territories, this border area development program. And in fact, this border area development program develop infrastructure, improves infrastructure in strategically important areas. Now we need to remember one thing, that when we talk about the development of infrastructure, China has a more edge over India, because China already built a lot of infrastructure on its side of line of actual control, but India still lags behind. But through organizations or through programs like border area development program, India has been identifying the strategically important locations, and India has also been developing infrastructure. And in fact, so these strategic areas are identified by the border guarding forces, and the border area development program also include developing model villages with education, health and livelihood facilities, improving infrastructure in basic areas like agriculture, water resources and financial inclusion, and also involving border guarding forces in the decision making as well, right? So these are the basic infrastructure development infrastructure development projects which are undertaken as part of this particular program. And second important program is a vibrant village program. So this particular program specifically aims to develop the border villages in India, right? So we have a lot of border villages, and in fact this is also very important for your prelims examination. And from these border areas, when we talk about these border areas across the line of actual control in India, they lack infrastructure. Even though they have a lot of potential of tourism, economic growth, economic development, they lack infrastructure and they lack connectivity. So vibrant village program aimed at arresting corruption, arresting migration from these border villages, and also promote tourism in these areas. So as part of the vibrant villages program in states like Uttar Pradesh, Himachal Pradesh and Arunachal Pradesh, so there will be improvement in the infrastructure. So the goal of the vibrant villages program is to connect villages to mainstream of development. And border infrastructure management scheme, BIM scheme, so this scheme aims to improve security along India's international borders, and it also includes several projects like building border fences, roads, floodlights, outposts, helipads and food tracks, and also deploying technological solutions in the areas where physical fence is not possible, right? So all these are the goals or the objectives as part of the border infrastructure management scheme. So ultimately in the conclusion, so you need to write, so enhancing the ability of border security forces through developing infrastructure, improving connectivity to effectively patrol and monitor these region of both LAC and line of control through technology upgradation. So there is a need to upgrade technology, there is a need to upgrade the infrastructure as well. So collaboration with all the neighboring countries that we have is very important to develop the mutually beneficial infrastructure projects that would benefit both the countries, and increasing economic and cultural exchange with neighboring countries through soft power initiatives would also help strengthen relationship, further build trust and confidence between the neighboring countries of India, that would be in line with India's neighborhood first policy. And the next question is about the social media, right? So the question is social media and encrypting messaging services. So they pose a serious security challenge. So we all knew that how social media has been emerging as a major threat, because it became part of everyone's life, a very important part of everyone's life. So it becomes a way of interaction, it becomes a way of integration of different communities, different societies. However, in recent times, it has been emerging as one of the major threats. So in this context, what measures have been adopted at various levels to address the security implications which are being posed by social media, and also suggest any other remedies to address this particular problem. So what should be the approach of this question? So there's nothing complex and difficult when it comes to developing approach of this question. So in fact, this question is asked like different parts, so you need to address each of these parts. So first and foremost, you need to define social media and briefly mention threats posed by social media as a flow chart if possible in the introduction, and then you need to describe what measures have been adopted at various levels to address security implications of social media, and then you need to mention some remedies and suggestions to address the problem, and conclude the answer by stressing on the importance of social media while addressing the potential challenges. So this is how they should be a proper structuring and framework for this particular question. And the introduction, so you just define in the introduction, so social media is a way people communicate and share their ideas, information, thoughts online through virtual communities and networks. So this is how social media actually work. Okay, so this is a way that people communicate with each other, they share ideas, they share information, they share thoughts online, so through virtual communities and networks. Now, what is the negative role of social media? So we need to talk about the negative role of social media, and because of that reason there is a demand for the increased regulation, increased scrutiny of the social media. So social media have a negative impact because of issues such as trolling and morphing, which could have impacts on the physical and mental health of individuals and psychological well-being of individuals, and inequality in the participation, breach of privacy, so which is a very important concern when it comes to the social media. Particularly article 21 of the Indian Constitution is very often violated, and communal polarization is also because of the social media, particularly fake news which are being spread through social media without verifying the facts also leads to a lot of communal tensions in countries like India, and spread of fake news and rumors through social media, and also affecting sovereignty of countries as well, and it also pose cybersecurity threats and attacks by the fraudsters, and also behavioral health impacts as well. Now in this context, so what measures have been adopted at various levels to address the security implications of social media? So we have understood that social media has a lot of negative impact. So it plays a negative role, or it has it has been resulting in a lot of threats to individual, society, and national security, sovereignty, and integrity as well. For example, when fake news spread through social media, so it could break the a social stability, right? So it could lead to the social tensions, particularly the communal violence or the communal riots, where a large scale violence takes place. The social stability, the social fabric is breakdown, so law and order breakdown would also takes place because of the social media. So it has also been threatening the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and unity of different countries. So that's the reason where countries have been increasingly calling for the regulation of the social media, the scrutiny of social media. As part of it, the government of India has established the fact check unit, right? So PIB, Press Information Bureau, has become a fact check unit, right? So therefore, what are the measures which have been adopted at various levels to address the security implications of social media? So in fact, users can take steps to secure their social media accounts, such as developing a strong password policy. So need to have a strong password, enabling two-factor authentication, using different passwords for different accounts. So these are all the measures that can be taken at the individual level to address security implications, right? So we have the cybercrime. So cybercrime, which has been becoming very important, or very a worst form of crime which has been taking place in recent times. So there is a need to prevent this cybercrime. So in order to prevent cybercrime, in order to strengthen the cybersecurity measures, we need to follow all these measures. So however, so when we talk about the security measures which have been taken at different levels, so one thing that we need to mention, that PIB as a fact check unit was established. Fact check unit was established, right? So this fact check unit would check the information's authenticity. And apart from that, we have the Information Technology Act in India, right? So that also provides safeguards to the social media platforms. So under section 76, right? So it provides certain safeguards. So the safeguard mechanism would be withdrawn. So if the social media platform don't remove the information which is categorized as fake news or misinformation, So apart from that, the CERT in Cyber Emergency Response Team was also established, CERT in, and CERT in at the national level and CERT Computer Emergency Response Team were also established at the states level as well. And the Union Home Ministry has launched Cyber Swachhata program. Swachhata program has also been launched by the union government at the national level. So in fact, a business can also limit access to social media accounts to a few people, and they can also revoke access when it's no longer required. So they can also train employees to recognize impersonated accounts and phishing frauds as well. And there is also a need for public awareness, because there is a lack of public awareness in the domain of in the area of cyber security, cyber crime, or social media, so that people can be able to understand or make a distinction between what is a legitimate information, what is fake news or misinformation. So governments have launched campaigns to educate the public about fake news and its potential impact on the internal security and sovereignty of the countries. So some remedies and suggestions that could address this problem potentially. So there is a need to create policies, there is a need for strong legislations and regulations to particularly regulate the social media. So establish guidelines for appropriate online conduct, expectations and penalties for the violations as well. So there is a need for becoming more and more transparent. When you encounter a problem, be honest and clear about it, and you need to show empathy, so understand and care about your audience's feelings, and you should also focus on solutions. In order to do that, you need to avoid assigning fault and instead focus on solutions. And you should also communicate proactively, keep your audience informed promptly. And so control how profile appears to other users by making profile pictures and posts public or private. And also there is a need to encourage engagement. Social media should be social, so businesses should be more and more interactive as well. So in this context, improving mental health and also providing an outlet for creativity, offering professional networking opportunities, so that would be creating more opportunities, building new business opportunities, and also marketing channels, and staying connected with the family, friends. So this is how you can write a positive and more impactful conclusion in the answer. So ultimately you need to emphasize that social media has a lot of advantages. So it has a lot of advantages. Along with that, it also has certain threats, but we need to balance the threats posed by the social media along with the benefits and the advantages of the social media. So ultimately the scrutiny and regulation of social media should aim at limiting the negative impact of the social media and further maximizing the positives or the advantages of the social media, right? So that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much. So if you like our work, please subscribe our YouTube channel and also hit the like button. Thank you.